Hi there, my name is Jim Birch, and I want to take you on an interesting journey that I suspect you have not yet been on and perhaps have been a little fearful, in the nicest way, of attempting to take. First, I'd like to ask you a question. Imagine that you are in a spaceship in space looking down on the Earth. If it were daytime, you could not tell that there were any other human beings here. And then if you got into the sun in this solar system, you could hardly find this Earth. You really would be very difficult to find it in the space of this solar system. And this solar system, if you were to place it within the Milky Way galaxy within which it exists, is almost impossible to find. There are about 200 to 300 billion galaxies in the Milky Way system, and we're just a very tiny part of that. Very difficult to find. And of course, the Milky Way galaxy isn't the end of it all. As far as we know, there are about maybe 800 billion to a trillion galaxies in this universe, and we don't know if what we see is the end of it. That's not the worst of it. If you are looking at this from our size as compared to everything else, that's us as individuals. Science tells us that there are 11 dimensions. Those are facets of life. There are only 4 felt in our existence at this time in this universe, which is left and right, back and forward, up and down in time. The other 7, they tell us, are tucked under so that we could have no realization of how they might be experienced. We don't know how they're experienced. But because of that fact, science tells us that there are innumerable universes, probably all existing right here in the midst of us, that we have no understanding of what they could be. What could they be? Could there be a universe of music? Could there be a universe of math? I have no idea, and most people don't either. So that is a pretty difficult thing to comprehend. We're not as important as we might at first seem. We live on a little crust of this earth that is formed by air and is just a little tiny ribbon that goes around the entire planet. But each of us is derived from that which gives everything its existence. And I'll explain this in just a moment. And so that makes us individuated manifestations of it. We are, at our core, what it is. Well, let me explain that in a little more detail. You know, we know so much more now than our ancestors ever knew about everything. We know for existence, for example, if you try to think of these things that are most important in our lives, things like love or anything else, if you start on a spiritual side, whatever that might mean to you, or on a scientific side, because those seem to be the two contrasting variables today, you've got to end up in the same place because there's only one reality going on here. For those of us who tend to be Christian, we would tend to start at the Gospels, believing that that's the greatest repository of wisdom passed down to us. But there are other faiths that have other sacred scriptures, so they start there, and there are people that have none. But if we start in those scriptures, we have a couple of things that happen to us the minute we do that. First of all, we always make amends in our minds that we know people of every faith and none who are every bit as loving and as loved as we are. And the second thing we know is that if we want to make the most out of that, we've got to look at it from the 30,000 foot altitude and study the forest instead of dissecting the leaves, which we are always prone to do. And the minute we do that, we find that the essential meaning in the Gospels was what's called the kingdom of God. That phraseology was used 120 times. So nothing comes even remotely close to that. It was of immense importance, but it did not mean what you and I just thought of when we heard those words, because that's a translation from the Greek that the Gospels are written in, and Jesus and all the people of his time spoke Aramaic. So what did it mean? Well, it always meant this all-pervasive, and that's the key phraseology there, all-pervasive, life-giving presence of divinity in everything now, right here in hand, in everything you might touch, and within each and every one of us. Each of us is an individuated manifestation of this divinity. Let's just take a little side jaunt and figure out, what is this divinity? We know it's not some man in the sky. It was not the theologians or the professional religionists who described for us what that is. It was the chemist of all people, the chemist in the 1800s, who said that the basis of all existence, from which we derive our existence and to which we go, and that which holds everything together so it just doesn't fling off into some giant soup, is consciousness. Consciousness is the basis of it all. And when they relayed that to us, all the religionists and all the philosophers and the theologians of every culture and philosophy and religion all ultimately said, well, you know, that's really what we think divinity is. That's true. That's God. And so everything derives its existence out of this consciousness. Now, this consciousness expresses itself, as far as we know, in two different ways. On the other side, before we ever get here into this physical universe, this consciousness is moving. Science tells us that. I can't explain it, but science tells us that. This consciousness moves, and in religious talk, it is called spirit. And spirit moves, and it forms different combinations, and it forms different densities. And when a certain density reaches its peak, it achieves a self-realization. Now, this is not outside of divinity. This is divinity itself moving, and within it forming a density that achieves a self-realization, and that's you. That's when your soul is born, but it's not born out of nothingness. It's born out of that which already existed within divinity. And that soul, being divine, of divine origin, and within divinity, is perfect. It's perfect. It has nothing wrong with it. Now, to take another little sidetrack, we don't use, to speak of a little baby, we don't say, well, that's a terrible creature. It does not have a job. It can't feed itself. It poops in its pants, at least occasionally. So let's get rid of that. It's not of value to us. We look at a little baby and we say, boy, that is a beautiful, wonderful creature. And I want to help it to become what it can be, because it's spectacular. And that's how God looks at us. Formed as we are, on the other side, within divinity, we're perfect. Not yet perfectly formed, but perfect. And so we look around and we see the beauty of where we are, and we want to appreciate it better, to understand our condition. So we choose that we want to go somewhere. Some of us choose to come here, to this magnificent place, beautiful, beautiful place, so we can have the challenges that help us to grow. Because that's what really helps us, challenges. Unfortunately, those challenges are things that need to be made better, typically called problems, and that produces a giant conundrum in our lives. Our soul is here so that we can grow, and our body that we come into this earth to be a part of, to be a human being, which is part soul, part animal, if you will, have different objectives. The soul says, be loving and kind. And the human portion that we come into, this animal body, says, I want that, I'm going to take it. And so we start out taking whatever we want in all so many ways, not just taking things, but doing whatever we want that we think will make us pleased. But after a long time, we discover often it's not the case, that does not make us happy. That when we did that, we took it from someone else, and that made us upset that we had hurt someone. Or we get put in jail, or someone hits us because we took it from them. All sorts of reasons. And after a long time of trying all that, we say, that didn't work for me. It wasn't my best self. I can't do that. I don't want to present myself to the universe in that way. Maybe I'll try this. Maybe I'll be kind and loving. It's been gnawing at my mind all this time. Maybe I'll give that a try. And when we do, bingo, that's it, because that hits us. That's really who we are when we're not in this temporary body. That is our being, and it feels good. So we choose to want to do that again. At that time, maybe we revert, and maybe we revert often, but we'll always come back to that's really what I want to be. And then all those things that we have done that others would say evil, bad, sin, terrible, terrible, were a blessing for us, because they showed us in the visceral experience of the marrow of our bones, that's not who I am. It's not what I want to be. It's not my best self. It's not how I want to present myself to the universe from this day on. I really want to be that. We have discovered who we're not so that we can more compassionately go after who we are. Now, when we get to this universe, we get here, this is another expression of that loving consciousness that we emerge from, our soul emerges from, because in science, the movement of consciousness is called energy. And energy, as Science 101 tells us, manifests itself as everything that is made out of atoms. And everything, body, table, chair, room, cars, planets, everything is made out of atoms. And so everything has at its basis of those atoms this energy that is the movement of consciousness. So however you look at it, bit of a long story, I admit, but however you look at it, that's the best story you'll ever hear, because the inevitable conclusion, whether you look at it from a spiritual perspective, a scientific perspective, you're it. Each of us is an individuated manifestation of divinity. And we come here for these challenges so that we can learn to grow. But this giant conundrum of coming for these problems so that we can be challenged, how do we ever get through that? Well, if you think about it, you'll know the answer. We get through it by loving each other. That's how we do it. We revert to who we truly are, and we can sustain anything. That love becomes for us a rock when times are hard, and it becomes a goal when things are going well for us. So that's why we come here. And that, by the way, is the message of most spiritual masters, if not all of them. It certainly was the message of Jesus, who said that the kingdom of God, that message that he talked about 120 times, is this all-pervasive, life-giving presence of divinity in everything right now. So we're all part of it. That was the whole message. He didn't give a rule book that said you got to do this, and you're going to be okay, and then this, don't forget this. He said, these are some stories I'm going to tell you, and what do you think of those stories? What's your conclusion to them? It's up to us to figure it out. It's not so easy. Sometimes we make mistakes, but we keep on going. So that is the human condition, and it's just wonderful. It's a journey we're all on, a universal journey. And so we have this loose organization, it's pretty loose, a spiritual organization that encompasses all religions, philosophies, and cultures, with the understanding that we are all one. The little things that often divide us are largely man-made, even religious tenets, from a time when humanity knew little about the universe around us and paled by comparison to that which unites us. The central thrust is that God or Allah, Yahweh, higher power, great spirit, or any of the other myriad words and explanations we humans have created over the centuries are but symbolistic of the underlying reality that, as science has finally told us in the 18th to 19th century, consciousness is the unifying element of the universe. It's the glue that holds it all together. That consciousness, we are told by science, is the binding element of this universe, but it does not tell us what those characteristics are. For that, we can go back into the long course of human history, because as far as we know, we are the peak of that consciousness, of its demonstration in our midst. There may be other entities and souls and spirits that are more advanced than ours, but we don't know of them. So as far as we know, we're the most advanced form of that consciousness that there is. And so we can go back into the long course of human history, as far as we can go back and see, and look in every nook and cranny of the world and discover that the most important thing to us has always been love. So that love is at the core of us. It's our most defining human characteristic. And so then we emerge from this loving consciousness, and that loving consciousness moves and gives existence and life at every moment to all that is. We human beings today speak in many languages. We also look at the world from different perspectives, all colored by our culture, our history, our religious teachings, whether properly or improperly understood, and our general sociological and historical condition. And yet there is only one reality. There is but one existence. There is but one power that infuses this world with existence and meaning and intelligence and love. There is but one existence. If one segment of human perspective has missed elements in its understanding of underlying yet movable truth, then that perspective is deficient to that extent, or it is enriched to that extent. That uniqueness enriches the rest, from which it can learn to see freshly. Moreover, in accord with the axiom that the whole is always more than the sum of its parts, all perspectives will be deficient in some aspects and enriched in its uniqueness. Nobody has it all. Nobody. So then, is it possible to speak in language that faithfully reflects both the message of all religions, philosophies, theologies, cultures, ethnic groundings, and human aspirations? Is it possible to express core human forces that motivate and inspire across all boards? Oh, yes. First, let's clarify what is the essential message of Jesus, of Moses, of Mohammed, and of all the masters who walked and walk this earth. It cuts across all strata of how we human beings divide ourselves. It also resonates with all religions, all philosophies, all theologies, all cultures, or with those who claim none. It is a message for all human beings, and not just ones who belong to any particular religious organization. After that, let's look at what science is telling us today. We will note that the trajectory of science and spirituality is merging or has merged. There is but one. We can see it if we look, and if we speak without the incrustations of the ages. We can agree as long as we don't insist that others use our exclusionary historic language and concepts. It is a new day. We know more than our ancestors. We build on the foundation of the past. But we do build. We learn. We grow. We cannot stagnate. We go upward. We go onward. And in the next few chapters, I will elaborate on this. But for now, here's a poem by Walt Whitman entitled Miracles. Why, who makes much of a miracle? As to me, I know nothing else but miracles. Whether I walk the streets of Manhattan, or dart my sight over the roofs of houses toward the sky, or wade with naked feet along the beach just in the edge of the water, or stand under trees in the woods, or talk by day with anyone I love, or sleep in the bed at night with anyone I love, or sit at table at dinner with the rest, or look at strangers opposite me riding in the car, or watch honeybees around the hive of a summer forenoon, or animals feeding in the fields, or birds, or the wonderfulness of insects in the air, or the wonderfulness of the sundown, or of the stars shining so quiet and bright, or the exquisite, delicate, thin curve of the new moon in spring. These, with the rest, one and all, are all to me miracles. the whole referring, yet each distinct and in its place. To me, every hour of the light and dark is a miracle. Every cubic inch of space is a miracle. Every square yard of the surface of the earth is spread with the same. Every foot of the interior swarms with the same. To me, the sea is a continual miracle. The fish that swim, the rocks, the motion of the waves, the ships with the men in them. What stranger miracles are there?